Thank you for joining us. I'm on location in Chicago, where the American Jewish Committee is hosting its 4th annual diplomatic marathon. Jewish community leaders from across the Midwest come to Chicago, and they participate in almost 30 meetings with diplomats in one intense day of Jewish advocacy.
We hope you go beyond the facts and get a sense of the spirit of OXI Day, a spirit that is relevant to the world we face today.
Many of you have heard me talk about my roots and my origins. And I am very proud to be the son of a mother from Crete, who's here tonight, and a son of Kalavrita, where my father was from. And in December of 1943, in the massacre of Kalavrita, the Nazis came through and murdered the entire adult male population. And they burned down village after village. And the only reason that my father was able to escape was because he was a child. In Crete, the same thing. After the Battle of Crete, the Nazis exacted vicious revenge on Cretans just for helping out the Allied troops. These horrifying massacres that none of us could ever fathom or want to think about happened. They didn't happen that long ago. So I think it's important that all of us are here. I think it's important that all of us never forget what took place. We make sure that we teach our kids and grandkids about what happened, and that we remember that struggle. And I gotta tell you, I am so proud of my ancestors, my parents and my grandparents, just like many of you in this room. Because of them and their willingness to fight back and fight the Nazis and say OXI, that's why we're all here today. So with that, Harry.
With this hour's Congressman Brad Schneider. Real pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
So we just experienced this wonderful event, OXI Day. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's a special day, and it's a special day for me personally because I was instrumental in helping bring the Hellenic American Leadership Council, HALC, and the American Jewish Committee, AJC, together 2 years ago, and that has led to the genesis of this event today. But I think it's also important to put it in the context of what's happening in the world, and the idea, where you have Turkey threatening Cyprus, you have an increase in anti-Semitism, you have ISIS, you have threats to Israel, and the idea that two peoples with a long history and tradition, but an emphasis on family, an emphasis on tradition, on values, coming together and saying no, no to ISIS, no to threats, no to anti-Semitism, and talking about a future going forward is really important. So today was a good day to be here.
And of course the heroic Greek people who stood up to the Nazis during World War II, when so much of the world was actually, for all intents and purposes, in collusion with the Nazis. What are your thoughts on that?
It was mentioned earlier tonight that it's exceptional to be celebrating the beginning of a war, but it was the Greeks standing up and saying no, that standing up to tyranny and saying we are going to hold our identity, hold our nation and fight back. I think that's an example to the world. And we're at a time now where we are seeing tyranny. No better example than what's happening in Syria and Iraq with ISIS. And to help people who are willing to stand on their own and say no, but the international community coming together and supporting them in their fight against tyranny is really important.
So we all have to learn from memories of the past and lessons of the past. And right here in your city, you have the Illinois Holocaust Memorial Center and Education Center, in fact. I interviewed Sam Harris, wonderful person. What are your thoughts on the need for remembrance?
A famous saying, those who fail to remember the past are condemned to relive it, to paraphrase. I think we need to know from where we come. I think we need to know the sacrifices made by those who came before us. But we also have to know and understand the victories as well as the defeats and the threats faced by prior generations to make sure that this and future generations can stand up to similar type threats that arise. The Illinois Holocaust Museum is a great jewel, and I'm very proud that it's in our community here in Chicago, because it's teaching people across generations, but in particular young people, about the threats to freedom, the threats to religious pluralism and identity. I'm also proud that the Illinois Holocaust Museum trains all of our state police.
Congressman, Israel is so very important to so many people in this country, and is Israel still as important an ally to the United States as it was in the past?
Oh, it's even more important. Israel is the most important ally we have, if not in the world, certainly in the region, in a very dangerous region. I've spent my entire life, going back to high school in the 1970s, advocating for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. It's a relationship that has endured and will endure. It's important. The role Israel plays, the values Israel holds, the shared values with our country are crucial. But it's not just about those shared values. It's about the strategic importance of Israel to the United States. So I was proud in Congress last year to help introduce the Israel Qualitative Military Edge Enhancement Act, as an example. This is a bill that would work to enhance or improve Israel's security. She'll never have more troops than her enemies, but she has to have a technological advantage. That passed the House of Representatives unanimously at a time where I don't think the House could agree that it's dark at midnight or bright at noon. Israel has undivided support because the Congress understands how important that relationship is. We will always be united with Israel, know that Israel has to be the homeland of the Jewish people, a democratic state in a very difficult region. And I think the engagement between our two countries will always be strong, steadfast, and secure.
In this most benevolent of democracies, the United States, in this great city of Chicago, you have the Holocaust Museum, and it is so essential for neither Jew nor Gentile to be permitted to forget that the atrocities perpetrated against Jewish and other people did take place. What are your thoughts on remembrance?
Well, remembrance is crucial. Other people have said, to paraphrase, if we forget our history, we're doomed to relive it. But we need to know from where we come, and I think that's true for all peoples, including the Jews. We need to know the triumphs, but also the disasters and the sources of those disasters at times. And the Holocaust was a terrible, terrible moment for the world, and obviously a devastating disaster to the Jewish people. I'm proud of the Illinois Holocaust Museum. It is one of the jewels of our community. It educates not just Jews, but all young people around our community on the perils of hate, on the threats of anti-Semitism and other similar types of discrimination, and the need to stand up. And as we are celebrating today, OXI Day, the need to say no to such prejudice. The Illinois Holocaust Museum trains police officers. Okay. The Illinois Holocaust Museum trains police officers on dealing with different cultures, different peoples. That's important. If we're a nation of immigrants, of people from all over the world, we need to celebrate our differences and work to build together our commonalities. And the Holocaust Museum is a step towards that.
Yes, sir. And speaking of information, the thought of misinformation comes up and how Israel is criticized by the media. The United Nations singles Israel out, such a hope it represented for the future after World War II. What are your thoughts with regard to the discrimination against Israel, how the mass media of the world singles Israel out for criticism while ignoring worse events elsewhere, a sort of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism?
Well, I think we're facing an increasing rise of global anti-Semitism, and you see it, and it comes often in the guise of anti-Zionism. The United Nations is a bastion of oftentimes hateful rhetoric. The UN Human Rights Commission spends more time dealing with Israel than any other nation. Israel, a country that respects human rights as well as much as any nation in the world. People of different faiths, people of different sexual orientations, different races are able to find a home and find their success in Israel. Israel should be celebrated, not condemned. And so we need to stand up. Global anti-Semitism is on the rise. It is different than what we saw in the last century. It oftentimes is conflated with anti-Zionism, anti-Israel rhetoric. But make no mistake, it is anti-Semitism, and we need to fight that. And it's a threat not to Jewish communities around the world, but to the nations around the world. I'm committed to working in Congress and with other international organizations to do everything we can to work and fight back against that. Anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiment in the United States is prevalent on our campuses. We have to make sure our campuses are safe places for our students, Jewish students and all students, to learn and explore ideas, and we need to make sure that the hateful rhetoric that you're seeing on campuses is dealt with in a very urgent way. And so that's one of the things I'm committed to working on in Congress as well.
Congressman, a real privilege and honor. Thank you so very much,
Great
sir.
to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
With us now is Amy Stoken. It's a pleasure to have you back on the Shalom Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you have this exciting event taking place, and I'd like you to share with our audience what the mission of AJC actually is.
AJC's mission is to enhance the security and safety of Israel and the Jewish people around the world, and also to advance the principles of democracy and human rights around the world. In essence, we are an organization purely devoted to global Jewish advocacy, and in fact, we've been referred to as the State Department of the Jewish people.
Hardly could be a more important cause. Tell us of the history of the American Jewish Committee.
AJC has actually been around since 1906. AJC was founded in the wake of pogroms in Eastern Europe, and the American Jewish Committee was actually the first organization founded by a minority to protect its own rights around the world. As I mentioned, we're an organization devoted to Jewish advocacy that has meant different things at different times. So over the course of those 100 or so years that AJC has been around, we've had different focuses. We have focused on Soviet Jewry. We have focused on civil rights. I think during World War II, AJC, along with many others, didn't rise to the occasion and didn't do enough. And I think right now we are in a defining moment for Israel, for the Jewish communities, and it's going to be incumbent upon us to rise to the occasion and address what's going on in the world right now. So, as I mentioned, we are just purely devoted to advocacy, and what that means is different at different times.
You're right, of course, and thinking about the history of World War II and the silence of the Allies and others, basically collusion, I would say. What are the current priorities of AJC at this time in history?
Before I address that, just to echo what you're saying, we do hear a lot of people saying that right now is comparable to the 1930s, and we're seeing little bits and pieces of it along the way, or we're seeing little small acts of anti-Semitism that are really painting a very scary picture overall. I think right now AJC's priorities are very well focused on what is going on in the world right now. Our number one priority is preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapons capability. Our second priority is promoting Israel's stance in the world. And our third priority is combating global anti-Semitism.
Global anti-Semitism, and it is actually more widespread today than just about ever. And now they call it anti-Zionism, but it's all one and the same. And the tendency of the world media and so many organizations to single Israel out for criticism is again a manifestation of anti-Semitism. What more is AJC doing to combat this on campuses and in communities worldwide?
Let me say a couple things, because I do agree with what you're saying, and just to focus a bit on what we have seen in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism around the globe, and particularly in Europe. I think we've been seeing it over the past decade. As I mentioned, you see little things happening, rising up in certain countries here and there, but I think we've been seeing it over the last decade and come to a real head in the wake of the Israel-Hamas conflict. I think you see people who want to pin it on one particular issue. I've heard people say that it's because of the influx of extreme Muslims that are immigrating to European countries. I really don't think it's one particular thing. I think it's a few things that have brought us to where we are today. I do think extremist ideologies are on the rise. Some of it does have to do with extremist Islam. Some of it has to do with the fact that economies are in bad shape, and we know from history that when economies aren't doing well, we see the rise of both populist parties, nationalist parties that are intolerant of all minorities, including Jews. And I think we also know that Europe is steeped in history of anti-Semitism, and while some of it has probably always been there, I think that they're finding it's more palatable and it's more acceptable to express that anti-Semitism now, which brings me back to talking about the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas. And I think we saw, as you were describing, really very thinly veiled anti-Semitism disguised as anti-Zionism, and I agree with you that it's essentially one and the same. And I think that it was incredibly scary to see the level of rhetoric, the level of violence that erupted as a result of that. So AJC has made this a very big priority. As I mentioned again, our number one tool is advocacy, and whether it's internationally, nationally, locally here in Chicago, our priority is meeting with people that are influential and that affect policy. And I think we've done a terrific job of that already, working with leaders in France and in Germany and in Greece. And we've worked with our partners to secure strong statements against anti-Semitism. And also, many of those leaders have advocated for legislation that puts those words into action on a very more specific level. There are a few things that AJC is focusing on and will continue to focus on. Among those are expanding our European offices. We have 22 offices right now around the globe, so we do have an architecture in place to address what's going on around the world, but I think we need to strengthen those offices, strengthen that staff so that we can reach out to more people, create and enhance those relationships. AJC has a program called Project Interchange. Those are educational missions that bring influential leaders and thinkers to non-Jewish, to Israel for the first time, so that they're able to experience it firsthand. Those seminars include university presidents, technology leaders, diplomats, state legislators, and it's really twofold. It's one, to be able to educate them on the situation that Israel is in, so they're understanding it beyond the media or beyond what they may have, what their preconceived notions may be. And then it's also to connect them with their counterparts in Israel so that they will actually come home and have a strengthened relationship with their counterparts in Israel and whatever they focus on. So for example, there was a Project Interchange mission that focused on leaders in the United States on water technology and connecting them with leaders focusing on the same thing in Israel, which will result in a mutually beneficial relationship. And finally, I would just add the media. And unfortunately, not all the media is as friendly towards our cause as you are, and I think we saw in the Israel-Hamas conflict lots of media out there that was unfair, that was anti-Israel, and so that is a humongous focus for AJC in combating what's going on in terms of anti-Semitism. Our Jerusalem director, Avital Leibovich, was recently on CNN. We have op-eds, whether it's in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, as well as leading newspapers around the world. We make sure that we are making our case heard, making sure people understand Israel's perspective, making sure people understand the dangers of anti-Semitism, both through traditional media and through social media. So we are also reaching millions, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter. But these are all parts of the advocacy work that AJC is doing in the current situation.
I was just thinking about what you said, and what a repugnant contradiction it is that Israel is singled out by the media as the scapegoat. Corrupt regimes use Israel to hide from their own failures. Cherchez la juif in French, blame the Jew. What are your thoughts with regard to how Israel is discriminated against by media with lies by omission and so forth?
I think there's two things going on here that are important, and one is what Israel represents in the Middle East, which is a bastion of democracy surrounded by a number of Arab nations that don't share the same values, don't share the same principles. I think that is much more of Israel being a symbol of the West in the Middle East, and that is what gives rise to a lot of anti-Israel sentiment. Then I think you have combined what you mentioned was just the history of anti-Semitism and blaming the Jews and scapegoating the Jews, particularly when economies aren't going well. That's what we saw in World War II. With the German economy, it gives rise to intolerance, it gives rise to nationalism, it gives rise to intolerance of Jews as a minority. I think it's important to note that that type of mentality is not just dangerous for Jews, it's dangerous for all of democracy. And we've made so much progress in Europe, and I think this is a really dangerous statement, not just for the Jews, but for the future of minorities in Europe. But I think we're seeing both of those elements come together, resulting in both increased anti-Israel rhetoric and increased anti-Semitism. So I do think we're in a very scary place right now, which is why AJC really does need to work around the clock, firing on all cylinders to reach as many people as we can to get the message across. And exactly what you're saying, how hard Israel has tried to make peace, all the wonderful things Israel is bringing to the world. I think it is incumbent upon not only the American Jewish Committee, but the entire Jewish population to be advocating and making sure as many people as they can reach really understand Israel's perspective.
How can people join AJC and participate and do their share?
Thank you for asking about opportunities in Chicago. We have many that go on annually. Our crowning jewel is our Midwest Diplomatic Marathon. What that is really echoing what New York is doing preceding the UN General Assembly, when leaders and activists in New York meet with over 70 different countries that are going to be participating in the UNGA and discuss issues of mutual concern and AJC's priority issues. We then, in turn, do that in Chicago. We have our Chicago board members as well as board members joining us from AJC offices all around the Midwest. And we meet with over 30 diplomats stationed in Chicago to bring our advocacy to an international level. And there we will meet with those diplomats over the course of a day and span the globe talking about the issues that we've been discussing here and giving the AJC perspective on those issues. The Diplomatic Marathon always kicks off with an opening event. This is a special event this year that is commemorating OXI Day. And OXI Day is a holiday celebrated by the Hellenic community where they are commemorating the Greeks saying no to the Axis powers at the beginning of World War II. And I think that it's a perfect example of the bridge building and the relationship developing that we're doing here in Chicago, the connection between the AJC and our counterpart, the Hellenic American Leadership Council, is a strong bond, and the OXI Day program is a very good example of that. The rest of the time in Chicago, we are really doing advocacy work on the international front with the diplomats either stationed or visiting Chicago. We're working on the interfaith front with interfaith leaders that are here in Chicago, and also on the interethnic front. AJC Chicago is actually in a unique position where we have more advocacy opportunities than we have members to do it. So we would love to have more people involved. I encourage everyone to visit us at www.ajc.org. We would love to work with you. We've got our work cut out for us, and it's really been a pleasure speaking with you, and I hope this is a relationship we can continue to develop as well.
Thank you so much for the important work you're doing with AJC And let's all hope for the very best for
Thank
Israel
you.
and all people.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'll be right back.